Hello.
Hmm. Oh, there we go. Okay.
There we go. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Let's see if anyone else is going to come here today. Um, it's been quite the week of uh, moving and job stuff, and yeah, this is the first time I am speaking from Boston, so it's nice to be here. Is the background noise okay?
I don't hear anything in the background.
Oh, the technology works pretty well then.
Yeah. So,
It's not a lot. It's just I kind of have it would sound like a fan or something, but
oh, that usually cancels out. I mean,
yeah.
well, I'm glad to hear it. You were successful in your move.
Yeah, and it was it was not really an easy first week, to be honest, but that's mostly just getting used to like parking and what I packed and didn't pack, and just a lot of things came up. So it wasn't really like the first few days were pretty intense, but each I think things crested kind of on Wednesday, and then Thursday and Friday were better. And like my bed frame didn't arrive properly until like Thursday,
Wow.
so just stuff like that. But it's okay. Overall, it's been nice here. Boston is such a very different place than I've ever lived. Yeah, I visited Boston, but living in Boston is quite different. So uh, I I I look forward to it, the city, and if there's ever a lab meetup here, or if there's ever the ability to do events and to meet people and to be around stuff is so incredibly different than like Albany or most of the places I've been. So um, I really look forward to that a lot. Um, but yeah, overall it's been good. Uh, it's been most of the tiredness or like the how do you say most of the uh, like uh, like sense of hesitation in my voice is from the fact that I I think I'm like sleep deprived for most of the week because I didn't really have a great sleeping surface,
Yeah.
and I had so literally the first I think 3 to 4 days I just didn't I had so little time to do anything, and unfortunately on a very related note, I really haven't done anything with Neuromatch either.
Oh, yeah.
Um, I really wanted to be a part of the deep learning in the most formal way, but I was talking to my TA for it, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do anything project wise. So I may just be an observer track, which is okay. But I have had so much stuff going on that um, I really haven't been able to do anything with it at all. So that's a little disappointing, but it's okay. Um, yeah, how have you been?
Oh, I've been doing all right. Been busy as usual, and you know, just it's fine. I'll talk about something I did this week in terms of a presentation. It seems like I'm giving them every week, but sometimes that's the way it goes. Um, Other than that, yeah,
Yeah.
getting ready for fall, and you know, with my other job that I have, we have things we want to do in the fall, and even in this group, we want to do things in the fall. So I'm just thinking through those
Hmm.
things. So just personally, I get how like when you move, it's like this. You have a million things you need to do. So I sympathize there. Just moved recently, and it was like the first week was quite something.
Yeah, especially in terms of like, in my case, this is sort of the end of the line for me because it started in May, in the middle of May, was, oh, maybe you get a new job, maybe you join the startup, maybe you get this research grant, maybe you leave the place you've been wanting to leave for a few years. And, it's been phenomenal that I haven't had to do any like major logistical. I've had to do minor, like micro logistical planning to get used to Boston, but it's just been great to not have to forecast. So that's kind of where my burnout is mostly is in that sense, and I'm recovering slowly because everything else is settling down. So, yeah, that's my update. Well, my personal update. Um, I have to say, you know, I'm being a little bit overly negative because I'm just still tired. I'm just like I'm just exhausted. But the overall, like I'm pretty happy to be here. I part of me can't really even believe that, like, it's a little bit surreal because it's like something I wanted to do for a while, and then everything seems working out pretty well. With a lot of the things that have been new in my life have actually gone really well, and I'm looking forward to that continuing. So I'll leave it at that, and we can move on to actual business. I don't know. I was trying to see if Anusha might join or Aaron might join, but I'm not sure what they're up to right now. So.
Okay. Well, I mean that's great on your end. I'm glad to hear that things are going well, and yeah, I've been wondering how you've been doing, and I know you've been busy with a lot of things, and we will talk a little bit about Neuromatch today, but it's the great thing about that is that it'll be available after the fact,
Yeah,
and so
I think I might try to do um, some like not maybe not a slow pod, but like a review of it somehow because I really wanted to be a major part of it, but it just it I won't like last year I was like super knee
right.
deep in everything, and this year is kind of like maybe not as much. But yeah, between that and I'm curious. I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about future plans for things because I really I have I don't really have a lot of as far as the talk about today. I don't really have a whole bunch of updates,
Yeah, yeah.
but I have a few ideas to talk about. But that's about it, really.
All right, that's great though. Well, we'll get to that in a little bit. I wanted to start off by saying if you're watching on YouTube, we're interested in doing things for fall. So if you're interested in doing something, please get in touch. In the next couple weeks, so we can plan things out. But
Yeah.
even if you don't, that's fine. We can talk about it. But I'd like to start kind of ramping up. I haven't really had time to plan much this week in terms of building a big overview. But we'll be revisiting this in the next several weeks. So we'll be trying to maybe go and look at what's going on in the different groups or different areas of interest. Just kind of reviewing that and then thinking about how to move that forward. Did you have something to say, Jesse?
I'm sorry. Was there an audio thing or what?
Oh no.
Uh, about the lab positions, you mean,
Yeah,
or
yeah. I thought you said you were going to say something, and then
oh, uh, I don't have like a full presentation about that in my mind at the moment, but just in general, for anybody who is kind of new to the lab and checking this out or sees this and is like, hey, what's it about? Um, maybe repeating some things, but there's a few there's sort of a few established teams in the lab as it is, and some of them are directly related to my own interests, or like I've sort of founded as teams. But and that's like Cognition Futures and the Ethics Society team. But and I would encourage there to be some. I don't know if we'll be fleshing this out in this meeting or later on, but like I think there's some things to specific things to focus on in terms of like machine learning or data science, or some educational components about that. I think it's going to be a major thing, and then those are some very specific topic projects. Like we have, the brain for vehicle stuff. We have some computation simulation things. We have some like really specific areas of focus, like developmental, either psychology or developmental aspects of cognitive science and how that relates to AI, like developmental AI. And there's a few other things to be explored too. But I think suffice to say for the moment, there's a lot. This is. I mean, obviously, I've been, not. I've been busy with other stuff this week, so I haven't produced these things yet. But in the coming weeks, there's going to be a lot of tailored. I'm really thinking about it in terms of like internships, and I don't want to necessarily put it as a internships. Maybe isn't the best word, but like the most familiar word might be like some specific project focused internship like opportunities, and because I think that would be a nice way to tailor things and give people some structure. Because we have our interdisciplinary open lab, and I don't ever want to change that or steer away from that. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to come and join and have some specific degrees of ownership. Like if you're very new to a field and want a lot of handholding and guidance, that's something that happens in the lab. And if you're more experienced or more sure of some things, you can have some ownership in some direction about where you want to go and have some resources and a team of people who want to support you in that. And I think that's really, really, really valuable. Yeah. Hey, Krishna.
Hi, Krishna.
Hello.
Good. Yeah, I think I don't know, we'll probably won't talk about that directly this week. Well, we might, because I want to go through a couple things, but definitely that's something that we are going to be discussing in the next couple weeks with respect to, I mean, the ownership part, it's basically if you do something, you can do as much as you want. You can lead your own projects, but it's also, if you need help, if you want to be a part of a project but not have time to lead it, that's fine too. Krishna, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. How's the first week of NeuroMatch deep learning?
Oh boy, it's really very exhausting.
Yeah.
It's like, how do I say? It's very exhausting, but it's fun. You got to meet a lot of people. You got to, they learn from you. You learn from them. That's good. And being a TA, all you have to do is speak for some time. That's really exhausts me. But it's all like worth it. So yeah, and this week I come up with a great thing. Maybe I'll not be able to present it in this meeting. By the time I have made a like 2-project proposal that I think you and Jesse would be like very interested. It's regarding reinforcement learning. So I'll be presenting in the next meeting this week or so. As hectic, I didn't get the chance to finish the PPT. So yeah, there are 2 projects that I think that we should like do in the lab in the coming weeks.
Okay. Well, do you have a quick description or just a 3-sentence description for each? Or
So It's have you ever played the game that comes into Chrome browser when your net is out? That the dinosaur game.
No.
Oh yeah, a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah. So that's when there is no internet connection. The Chromes let you play that game until the net comes back.
Huh.
So I'm like planning. It's already been done, but like I'm planning to do this project with like this lab. So we make an agent that plays these games on itself. So it's a reinforcement learning problem. And the second one is like you ever played Mario?
Yes.
Mario Super Bros. So that yeah, when AI plays Mario, yeah, these both are like done in the industry, but like it's like doing them yourself, making them from the scratch. So these are the programs that I'm like interested in.
Well, that sounds good. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah,
I know that they have a lot of like for AI and for reinforcement learning, they're doing a lot of game building. So they build
yeah,
these environments, these different games as benchmarks, but they also build them. I mean, there's a lot you can do in a game that you
yeah,
can't necessarily do, say, like just with a generic agent, because the action structure is already built into the game. So there's a lot you can learn from in the game, and it's the computational complexity is low enough so that you can control the environment, so you know kind of what aspects of the environment are contributing to the learning in that.
yeah. And once you like do it for some like very known problems, then you can take it to the unknown problems.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so why don't we? Glad to hear both of you are doing well. Why don't we start with the Slack review? Let me share my screen. You can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Not a lot in the Slack this week. We had something in brain organoids. It's been a while. Katerina, who is, she's in the Slack, and I haven't seen her in a while. She put this paper in BCNNM, which is a framework for in silico neural tissue development modeling. So this is pretty nice. This is actually, I think this has something to do with organoids, which we talk about in the DevaWorm group a lot from time to time. We review papers on organoids. But this is where they have this organoid model, and I know Krishna knows what they are. Jesse probably does too. If you recall, they're these. You have a bunch of cells. You put them in a cultured environment, and they're stem cells, so they differentiate in different ways. And depending on the media that you put it in, or you can put it on a physical scaffolding, they'll develop into different types of geometries and colonies called organoids. And so you can do things like model tissue differentiation. You can model the brain or the developing brain. And so this is like a computational model, basically, for some of these organoid models. So it's like a model of an experimental model, because the organoid is an experimental model of the brain. It's a model system, but it's not the actual developing brain, but they're comparable. And then you're doing this in silico modeling of that. So you're modeling neurodevelopmental processes. So this kind of fits into the developmental AI area too. This isn't really coming up directly. If I go through the Frontiers article, maybe I can see it here. So if we go down, maybe a figure, we can find a figure in this. I think this is the figure we were trying to look at before. It's going to take a while. So this is the process of axon pathfinding and the creation of synapses. I'm not going to click through it because it's taking a while to load, but basically you have this systems model of this process. You have cell types and quantities at the end of the simulation. So this is where you're actually building the simulation, then you're generating a bunch of different types of cells. You get these neuron restricted progenitor cells creating L3 and L4 neurons. So you're getting this differentiation process in the simulation, and spatial distributions of all types of cells, so they're able to describe that. Distance from the center of the organoid. This is actually maybe what we were thinking of originally when we were talking about modeling organoids. Maybe not exactly like this, but this is one way to like look at these things and kind of extract principles out of it. You could do a lot of organoid experiments, in biology, in a biological lab, in a wet lab. But, actually trying to extract principles out of those experiments is very hard. And so you would build a simulation like this to do that. So they kind of talk about, I think they're just observing experimental data, and then they're actually building this simulation and testing out some of their ideas. So, this looks pretty good. They've got a lot of nice summary graphs in this article as well. So this is, don't be scared off by this. This is a paper on neural organoids, but it's also a paper on developmental anatomy and things like that. So if you're developing a developmental system, there's some interesting information in here. I don't think there's anything in the Cognitive Futures channel from this week or from CogSat's old conference materials. I know that we had a couple things in the events that I missed in the last couple weeks. This is one here. This was back on the Monday of the CogSci conference, so that seems like ancient history, but it was like 2 weeks ago. And there was a session, and I know I alerted Jesse to this, but I don't think he had time to make it. But if you have access to the platform that they were using, the underlying platform, the recordings might be available in it now, because they were recording and they were going to post them. And it's a SASE workshop. So I don't know if I mentioned this during the week, but there was this, at the beginning of CogSci conference, there was this workshop called Symbolic and Subsymbolic Systems in People and Machines. And so this was something that is very similar to some of the stuff that we had talked about during NeurIPS. Like, I think Josh Tenenbaum was involved in organizing this, at least. There were some people who had worked with them. There were some other people who were, Judy Fan was there, Peter Dion, who's a computational neuroscientist. So there are some big names here, and maybe some not so big names, but they were doing some really interesting work. And it was a little bit more focused towards the CogSci part than the machine learning part, but it was still pretty interesting, and there was a lot of computational stuff regardless. So this is basically where you have these symbolic systems that sit on top of, like the GoFi that we think of as the good old-fashioned AI was a symbolic type of representation. And so we moved on from that in a number of ways, and they kind of talk about that in these talks. But they've also included sort of subsymbolic systems as well. So, the kinds of things we talk about when we talk about deep learning networks are subsymbolic. They don't have explicit symbolic aspects to the representation, but nevertheless, they have them in there. So most of these talks focused on the symbolic part. There was some sub-symbolic aspect to the models that they presented, but I didn't see a lot of a lot of creative integration of these. I think there's a lot of focus on the symbolic models, and then the sub-symbolic models were there. They didn't really talk about the strengths and weaknesses of each. There were no symbiotic models, for example, where you had two different types of model. You had deep reinforcement learning, though, which was an interesting talk. You had some other, like the model-based deep reinforcement learning was interesting, and then some of the other reinforcement learning talks were also very interesting. So yeah, these were, this is just a taste of that area, but they had some pretty interesting conversations. So I have some notes from that, and I'll have to go back and see if I can dig them out if people are interested. Definitely something that if you're interested in that area, I think I did post a few pictures here in the channel. So this is this is actually a talk that was given at the CogSci main conference. This is some developmental stuff they were doing. So they were doing this explaining physical rule learning. And then they have this rules and simulation for rapid flexible learning. This is another slide from a talk. And then there is this interesting slide that I found, and this is something Eric Schultz, this person here, he's from Germany. I can't remember what university, but he was talking about this sort of paradigm that he thinks of problems with or approaches with, and he calls them neats versus scruffies. So you can see the neat, which is this robot that has like these little modules that have these nice networks in them, and it's all modular and nice and separated. The problems are all separable. And then the scruffies, which is this little monster that's going to beat up the robot, the neat robot, that has like a bunch of scribbles. And the scruffies, I guess, represents the problems and the approaches that are not really that well defined or characterized, versus the neat, which is where you have these, these canonical problems, these nice benchmarks, and nice models that work all the time. And it's seductive to think that the nice models and the good results are the things that we should really pay attention to. But actually, it's the scruffies that might actually give us more insight, because it's the scruffy problems, the scruffy models, that actually uncover more we don't know about intelligence and about the brain, such as it is. So, there are things that you're really hard to define. You have to work hard to define them. Maybe the problems aren't very neat or neatly presented, but that's, you can learn a lot from that. So, he was talking about problems with grammars, which is this idea of building a grammar for a symbolic model. You have a number of problems with something like that. Now, grammar is a neat representation for looking at a symbolic system, but there are a lot of problems with something like that. So structures are hard-coded, no learning to compose infinitely many grammars, biologically implausible. So this is where a scruffy model would come in handy to kind of overcome some of these problems. So that was a interesting set of talks in that session. The events news, there was something, there was this Radiance and Brain Organization workshop. I think this, it was last week. I forgot about it last week's meeting. But it's something that the Montreal Neuro Group is putting on again, this Gradient and Brain Organization workshop. And this is on YouTube, so this is a whole session here. I think it's like 3 hours of different people giving lectures on different areas of gradients of brain organization, which I think they had last year, and it was interesting. So that's in the same area of interest. If you're interested, go check it out. There's something in general. Oh, Jesse, yeah, thank you, Jesse. I forgot about the link this week. I usually post on this channel, but thank you. We don't have anything in the Neuromatch channel, or I think there was something random. It was Zara who had, watched this video here. I think it was a anime thing, and yeah, so it's really, if you're interested in that, check it out. So that's, I think, all we had this week. I think we had anything virtual reality. So that's all we had this week. Any questions or comments about that?
Nothing from my side.
Okay. Yeah. So that was, we didn't have a lot going on this week, but we did have some things wanted to make sure we covered. Jesse kind of dropped off for a minute here. Here he is.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I had to reconnect there. I was just saying, I forgot a bit about the Sassy workshop, and in part because I love the name, I'm gonna really talk about that more. But yeah, that's thanks for reminding me of that. 'Cause I missed that entire thing really. But that's um, yeah. I hope I can get into the underlying. I had problems getting into the underlying thing last time. I don't know. I hope I don't know, activate that too late or something. But I would want to go back and look at that stuff. Um, that was quite interesting and very very relevant to many things. And yeah, I will note that Judy Fan did like our. I think I posted this in the Slack somewhere or something. I mentioned that, but
Yeah.
Judy Fan did like our your post about recapping our Toxide discussion group. So that was like, a little something. But I have to go back and check out this workshop for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I saw that, and I don't remember what channel it was in, so I didn't bring it up. I don't remember if it was in. Yeah, anyways. Yeah, that's good. Getting some attention there. And yeah, so I think that was a good session. I think that's worth going over and recapping. I'm just writing a note to myself here. And then certainly, this discussion about, different types of levels of symbolic model or sub-symbolic model is interesting.
Yeah.
We still have this Metagrain models paper, and let me quickly go to that. I'll share my screen. So this is the current state of it. There isn't a lot more that I think I showed it last week. If you were here, I think both of you were here. And this is just kind of like going through what we have, maybe laying out some principles for it.
Is this a revised paper, right? This is from I saw it come from like last. This is a brand new paper, or is this wow.
This is something that I'm just putting together. This is like stuff that we've talked about. It's a newer paper. I don't know how long it needs to be. I don't think too long. This is for the handbook, the EI handbook.
Oh, for the embodied workshop.
Yeah. So this is just something that is going to be due in September. I'm getting it together. These are just things that we've talked about in our talks and our meetings about this. So I'm going to put together some things on it, and of course some things that are a little bit different as well. Like there's some talk about anatomical, why you want to make it look like an anatomical process, things like that. But these are all kind of things that, there's probably more to say here because I think the abstract can be cut down. I know this is what we had to submit for the abstract, but there's a lot here that can be added in, and it's just supposed to be like an introductory paper for it.
How what's the overall word limit on that?
I think it's pretty flexible, so I don't think it's like there's a word limit, but I also don't think there's not a lower bound or an upper bound. I think it's like maybe 4 or 5 pages at least, but I think we'll go over that. That's not.
Okay, and I haven't seen this at all. And apologies if I should have. But because I don't know, this is mostly just Metagrain models in a general sense. Is there any specific thing about like do we go in? Is it mostly Metagrain in the general sense? Is there anything relevant to developmental AI in there yet? Or
Actually, not yet, but that's something we probably should add in. Like, we'll have development and evolution, but I think
okay.
Maybe there should be like a developmental AI, like at the end, like an application domain. And then we'll make a note here that we need to add in, because I mean we can we broaden out the context.
Yeah, I'm thinking of things in terms of also like there's a lot that paper that I presented at the Cognitive Science Society, Orente's paper that I reviewed, I should say, that I think that'll be a really interesting way to ground some of the work we're trying to do. And I don't know. I don't want to take Metagrain models too far off the track or off the course we're trying to go on with it. But I just thought, so even in terms of like the methods and why to do it a certain way, like there's some justification that even if we're not doing pure developmental work with Metagrain models, I think there's some justification for why, methodologically speaking, why some of our simulation or theoretical work is reasonable. Excuse me, is reasonable or is like transitions into other things that can be studied in terms of embodiment. I imagine the overall lens for this is going to be about the importance of embodied intelligence. Like that's the theme of the
Right.
What I don't know project that it is part of. Is that so? Like, is it like an embodied intelligence? Like,
Yeah.
like is the umbrella? It's going to be part of an ebook, or what is it? What is
Yeah, it's like a well, they're going to publish a book, I guess ebook because it won't be published in paper, but and then the idea would be like that you would, if it were a journal special issue, it would be much more formal. This is more like a handbook or something where you have like a chapter, and the chapters can be of varying length. So they'll probably organize it based on like, what category it's in. So, if we make it like about embodiment and development, that's like a place where they can put it in that area. And so,
okay, and
yeah.
After I'm sorry to forget these details, but is the overall, what is the ebook about? Is it just like the embodied intelligence workshop ebook, or?
Yeah, I think it's just like a catalog of approaches that people have. So, like bringing together, all the different approaches that people presented on. What are the perspectives that people are coming out with? Our perspective is different from like something else that someone else has done. Their robotics approaches. Their, maybe more behavioral flavored approaches, that sort of thing.
Okay, and is this I don't know what to refer to this as, chapter? Would it be a segment that we're working on, or what? How would
Yeah, I think it's technically a chapter. So, it's just like I think the lower bound is like maybe 4 to 5 pages. I know they said that you can have smaller contributions or larger contributions. I have to go back to the email and be very clear about what the.
Well, because I'm wondering, what I would love to understand is how much should we, because in one sense, I have, I guess to explain my motivation for all of my interjections is because I feel like one of the things that I really taken away from the Cognitive Science Society, even what little I did for just my own part, I didn't get to watch that sassy workshop. I'm going to have to say like that every time I say it, I'm sorry. But the sassy workshop, I didn't get to do a lot with that event for obvious reasons. But one thing I took away from it is this, how situated things are. Like my take on the background and conscious things definitely expanded and grew and changed in that time. So I guess what I'm saying is, in this chapter, I don't know if this is like a chapter in a book. I would love to know what other introductory materials provided. Like I know a lot of books, or a lot of like compilation, edited by blankly blank with contributions from 20 people. Like I know that's very much. Not every chapter necessarily goes in depth or creates a background.
Yeah.
So I guess I would be wondering, how much should we try to situate or motivate or create a background for what we're doing, because part of me really wants to do that, but also I don't know if that's extraneous to the objective of the chapter that we're doing. Like there could be an extensive background for a lot of the things, I think, but I also don't know if that would be like make us less likely to be accepted, or would be a waste of space, and so on and so forth.
I think I think the best way, and it may be that they don't write the they don't motivate the work. Like they'll get the submissions and they'll see what they have, and then they'll work on like the intermediate parts, which is like basically if we have like 5 submissions on development, we'll do like a motivation on development section and write it in, and then that'll be the book. So they might not do that till after. So we don't really know what the sort of the lead-ins are, but we can motivate it, and I agree. I think we should motivate it within the paper. Let me put a note here.
Yeah, and like obviously there's going to be an introduction section, but it's more like I feel like my sense of what could be what could be in that space it has changed over the last month. To be very brief about it, and in a good way. But it's yeah. I just wanted to ask about that, and I'll go back and look at all this stuff more in depth. But yeah, I wanted to ask about that.
Oh, yeah, I think that's something we still need to work out, just in terms of like the motivation for it. There's like what I have here right now is just kind of like a description of what Metagrain models are. I haven't really put any motivation in yet. But yeah, it's something. And then, we don't need to motivate with everything in the world. I think it's just largely like, okay, we have embodied models, we have embodied cognition, we have embodied robotics, we have some of the stuff like from the developmental Bradenberg vehicles that's also, kind of an inspiration for it, which comes from Bradenberg vehicles. So that's all kind of in the mix there. And then this will be something that I think most of that audience will understand, but they won't immediately think about it when they're reading it. So if we give them that background, I think that'll be good, a good start, and then we can launch into our contribution to this. So yeah, a lot of times it's what people will do when they write papers is they'll try to find, and it takes a lot of work, try to find where it fits in the literature. What missing piece are you addressing? Is this something that is like that people have not thought about before, or is it something that needs to be improved in the literature and people have just kind of ignored it? Or, is it some new finding that revolutionizes the field? These sorts of things. So that's a good area to focus on, and to get it to a level that's, I don't know about everything is going to be dated probably. It's like a lot of the NeuroSim papers where, it moves so quickly from year to year that it's hard to say like, this is state of the art, and then you read it the next year and it's like not state of the art. So
yeah, that's there's a conversation to be had about that elsewhere regarding some of the stuff I've been involved in, but yeah.
Yeah, but I think we can make it timeless if we stick to things that like more traditional themes in the field, like embodiment, and that because someone might argue, well, this is there probably isn't that much of a controversy, but we're not really looking to stir up controversy. We just want to motivate it into like some area of the field. This is where we kind of situate this. No pun intended, because situationism is actually a thing in this area, but okay, so that's I put the link in the chat here, so
yes.
And Krishna, you're welcome to take a look at it as well if you would like. I know you have expertise in like reinforcement learning and deep learning. It might be something you might be interested in, especially some of the more technical aspects we might talk about, maybe some specific models as well, if that's something. Yeah.
Yes, I will.
Okay. So let me let's see. I wanted to go a couple other things here next. So I this is the Sassy workshop. Okay. So this week I attended a thing called Find Your Inner Modeler. This is the logo, and this is a workshop that's been put on by the NSF over the last, I think, 5 years. This is the fourth one in 5 years. They didn't have one last year, but they've had a couple of these in Chicago and in Birmingham, Alabama, and they're really kind of sponsored by biomedical scientists who want to understand biological modeling better. This is an NSF initiative, an NSF education related initiative that they got a grant for, and they want to expose people in the biomedical sciences to modeling, and they want to get computational modelers more integrated with people in the biomedical sciences than a lot of the experimentation that's going on. So I presented at this conference before in a more expansive role, but this is a sort of a 10-minute talk I gave on the role of representation in biological modeling. And so this is a thing that I thought that there was a need for in this group, where they have this, basically it's this idea that when you build a biological model, what is it representing? How do you build that representation so that you can successfully characterize the organism that you're looking at or the process that you're looking at? So I focused on this idea of when considering a biological system, it's important to consider what is the most appropriate level of fidelity. And so fidelity meaning realism or detail. So in this in this slide, we have a bunch of pictures of the same harbor, or a similar harbor. And the idea is that you're using different styles to represent the same information. So you have your boats, you have your buildings, you have your waterfront, and your harbor, and then all those things are represented in different ways in these images. Now, fidelity is different because fidelity means what am I modeling? Am I modeling every single detail? Am I modeling every single window or building or part of a ship? I mean, this one on the left or this one on the right is a photograph. So the photograph just basically takes what's in the visual field and just makes a copy of it. These two here are paintings, so this one has reflections on the water, which are augmented from this photo, but this doesn't have any reflections at all. So you're putting in details that may or may not be relevant to your interest in the system. So that was the idea. And then there's this trade-off between parsimony and high fidelity. So this is a model with minimum detail, which is parsimony. I just want a black box, or I just want a couple of neurons that are connected, and they could just be circles and lines between them with an activation function. Or I want a high fidelity model, which is like a neuron with every last component that a real neuron has. And then there are trade-offs as to whether those are useful to people. If you're just looking at some basic information processing, for example, you don't care about all the detail. But if you're looking at a biomedical question about ion channel function, maybe the maximal detail model is best. And then I provided a graph here of different, it's a taxonomy of different types of models, biological models. So, you have this vertical scale of organization in biology, so you go from a molecular pathway up to a whole organism. And then you have this level of detail, so you go from this spherical cone of vacuum or this cartoon to things like networks, which abstract just kind of the neurons and the connections from the brain, to whole organism simulations or very detailed models of the cell. So then there's this image from the open worm foundation where we have this inside of the worm. This is the muscle, this is the body wall and the muscles, and this is just kind of a view inside of this model of the neurons. So it's a pretty detailed model. These, of course, aren't just little pieces of geometry. They have a function, but you can see that's a fairly high detailed model. And then a lot of these, the model realism aspect is if I have a real frog, I want to build a frog that's almost exactly like the frog in different ways, or like an airplane. So I want to, this is the idea of realism. This is the idea of fidelity. If it's really high fidelity, or if it's almost, you're trying to be as realistic as possible, then it would look like this phenomenon question. The question is this necessary for most questions, or, maybe... Oh, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there some physical method, or some, how do I say, SI unit, some unit that we can describe how our model accurate is, or how real it is?
So I guess it's
I can see this model and tell between 10 models that which one is the best suited. But is there any some fundamental unit, some mathematic unit, some physical thing?
Yeah, I mean, people do this. So one of the things they do is they have they'll make this following comparison. So they'll say you'll have a graph where you're looking at the data that you're collecting from a real system, like some output, and this is the function, and then you'll have the model, and the model will look like this. Okay, so this area in between the model and the output of the simulation is usually what people will use. And you'll see this a lot in biological models, where they'll take a system, they'll look at the output in an experiment, and then the second function is the model output. So this is the model, this is the phenomenon. And then there's this difference, area under the curve difference, that people will use often to look at the difference between the two models. Now, this is only good if you're using a predictive model where you can generate that output. And oftentimes, in terms of model realism, we want to add elements so that you get close enough to this empirical curve, so that it's indistinguishable.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I think that's one of the slides I have in here. So then the next slide is this tweet from Matteo Contarelli, who's a OpenWorm person, and he had this tweet back when they were doing their workshop in London, and he says one of these images is a microscopy image of a C. elegans crawling across some gel, and another one is a simulated C. elegans. And so the question is, can you tell which? And the GIF isn't shown here, but the idea is that they're almost indistinguishable. So that output of the model and the biological system are indistinguishable from the movement pattern. So then you go back to this graph here, and you see that the overlap between these is minimized, these two functions. So that's what we're talking about with realism. And you have this sort of continuum between the spherical adult developmental phenotype and a vacuum. I say adult developmental because there's no difference between the two processes. It's just a spherical thing. And then hyperrealism, which are these hyper-realistic models. So then there are examples, though, where fidelity maybe doesn't make as much sense. And so in some systems, in this case where they're looking at toxicokinetic modeling, parsimony is good, but you don't want to disregard physiological fidelity because it makes a difference in your measurements. So you can't make steady state estimates unless you have a lot of detail in your models. But in the case of something like medical simulation, a lot of times when people are interacting with simulations of, say, a surgery environment where you're manipulating, you're making some sort of surgical maneuver, fidelity maybe isn't that important. And it's kind of counterintuitive, but it only engages learners. It's not necessary for people to learn things. So there are different cases where fidelity makes a difference. So it's just a matter of finding the right level of abstraction. We have these black box models, and then we have different types of things that you go from this black box model to something more detailed. So you have artificial neurons, you have a motor neuron with the anatomy emphasized, and you have a motor neuron with the ion channels emphasized. Each of these three models will give you different information, And depending on your question, that's what you want to do. And of course, there's this trade-off in abstraction. So for this chair, we might model the material surface, surface materials. We might model the function. We might even model the particle physics of it. And so is this something that, is this something that's underdetermined? Do we need more variables? Or is it overdetermined? Do we need to just focus on the surface materials? So these are the trade-offs you make. And then we want to refine, generally we want to refine these black boxes, which are just inputs that provide an output, and we don't know what's going on, with white boxes where we know what's going on inside the black box. And then, we talk about, actually this is a plug here, this section for Metagrain models, where we talk about the representation-free versus representation-rich models. And I actually advertised the talk that we had at Cultural Evolution Society on that. And then the cellular automata is phenotype. So this cellular automata models the phenotype in the sense that it looks the same. And, you can measure the different, states as sort of, there's this computational universality. So this computational model will replicate all of the different patterns you might get in the phenotype. But we're not doing this from a first principles thing. In other words, we're not doing this from a genome, which you would see in the biological organism. We're just generating the states. And so they don't really generate in the same way, but it might be a useful model nonetheless for understanding the variation in the patterning. And so that was the whole talk, and it was supposed to be about 10 minutes long. But we have someone new here. So who is this?
Oh, it's me.
Oh, hi.
Avery.
Hi, how are you, Avery?
Pretty good.
Good.
Sorry, popping me.
Yeah. All right. Welcome. So yeah, I was just talking about this talk I gave this week on modeling and different things like that. So, any questions about that?
No questions, but look good.
Okay. Let's see. Yeah. Having a bit of trouble with my camera. I don't know why. Oh, maybe what I have is not doing this right. Okay. There we go. I'm back. Here's my camera. I just wanted to make sure my camera was back. I think I hit the wrong button. In any case, okay. So, yeah, that was the talk I gave. It was, yeah, we had a question from Krishna on how do we model, or how do we measure the output of a model for model realism. And there are other ways to measure model realism as well. You could make an inventory of parts, for example, and you could, they do this in synthetic biology where they model the parts and they have a list of parts, and then they try to they try to replicate those parts. And, that's another measure of realism. If you need every part of the system or not to make the output. So in a synthetic biology context, you might have a bunch of parts that make this gene product that you want to make. They'll do things with bacteria where they want to put together a minimal genome and create some product, some gene or some gene product for a vaccine or something. And they'll have to just put together, boot up a cell where they have to put the different components in. They have to put different genes in the genome and things like that to get it to work. So then the question is how many parts do you need to get it to actually work? And that's another related question I thought about after the talk. I had a couple of people I talked to about this too. They were really interested. So yeah. So we have that, and then next thing I wanted to talk about was this thing, and this actually goes back to the trajectories session, and that is this is something that came up from someone in the A-Life community, Aimi Khan, and it's this thing that they did with it's the A-Life journal, and so the A-Life journal has been going on since about 1993, and so what they did here is to take all of the articles that have been published in this journal and created a database of them. So if you go to this OSF, and I put it in the chat, this OSF repository, they have the CSV file here, and it has a list of the publications. So this is something we talked about at the in the session, I think, was like one way to really like do some hardcore sort of trajectory building is to look at like these sort of bibliometric collections or these bibliometric data sets. So that's something that we didn't get to do in the workshop too much. We talked about it some with, you know, some literature review. But if you really wanted to do like a hardcore systematic investigation into some, you know, building some trajectories, you know, point by point, this would be one possible way to do this. So this database has all the publications from like 2020 back to 93, and has like all these, the title, the author. I don't know why these things aren't necessarily that relevant. The abstract is in here, so you can mine abstracts by looking for different terms in the abstract. You can do, you know, different types of things, like look at the issue and volume. So you can look for trends, like say you wanted to mine like the abstract for a certain term, and then look for like the issue in which it appears, the frequency in different issues. So like, or different volumes maybe would be more useful, you know, across the years. So maybe there's a term that appears in the first 5 volumes and then it doesn't appear anymore. Or there's a term that crops up maybe in like volume 10 and then continues on to volume 20 and then dies off. These are things you can find. Or, you know, maybe there are themes that kind of diverge. I mean, there are a lot of ways you can do this. You know, you have the title, you have the abstract. So then those things can be, you know, looked at using terms or using like, you know, another type of, you know, metadata. You could create like a list of terms and then have metadata attached and say, you know, this is representative of this theme. And so I want to get all the terms that represent this theme together and see what their trends look like. You could even look at authors if you wanted. So this is the type of thing, you know, we would need to do like these systematic investigations of trajectories. And this is a nice data set because, you know, it's like represents, I think it's representative of a single field, A-Life. It's the main journal in A-Life, and it has this, you know, sort of historical aspect to it where you can go back, you know, a couple decades to themes that were going on in, you know, 30 years ago almost. So there, you know, a lot of authors and a lot of topics that are bygone, and some that have just emerged in the last couple of years. So that, you know, that would be interesting to actually do some more detailed investigations of this data set. Okay, Krishna had to leave. Thank you for attending, Krishna. So that's that. Let me go to the submissions document now. So this is, again, isn't as active as it's been in the past part of this year, earlier part of this year. We have different things. The allostasis machines, for example, is completed, but I have been talking with Rashab about this, and we were going to do a new version of this where he was going to do some simulations using reinforcement learning, but I haven't heard from him in a while on that. So, you know, there are things like that going on. We have other things that are kind of like, I don't think there's too much that's been lost here. I think we have like the Neuromatch Academy projects. I think that's probably done. We're not going to talk about that much anymore this year. I'll put red on it. I'll put green because we've done this, but it's not been like, I don't think the lab did a lot with this this year, but that's okay. We just didn't have a lot of time to do it. I just wanted to make sure that we paid attention. I can't seem to find the right color here. Well, anyways, I'll do this later. This is the Metagrain models overview. So this is the thing that we're just reviewing earlier with Jesse. And Avery, you're welcome to participate in this as well. I don't know if the link's in your chat. I'll put it in the Slack. But this is a paper on this overview of the Metagrain models approach. It's going to have a lot to do with embodiment and other topics like that. Then we have some newer things here on the list. So we have actually Krishna just talked about the two different reinforcement learning ideas he had. So that's interesting. We might try to drive those forward, and maybe we can find a NeurIPS workshop to submit that to, which I think talked about last week. We have this opportunity here, the MIC workshop. So this is coming up in September 10th. So the deadline is September 10th. And I think they need like a 3 to 5 page, it's a 4-page paper with references. So this is something that Avery, that Jesse and I were discussing last week. Maybe Charlotte Guo is going to be interested in this as well. This is the thing on meaning and context. So this is pragmatic communication in humans and machines. So this is something that we might do in the short term. It would be about a month from now when it's due. And then this would be an opportunity to present at the NeurIPS, one of the NeurIPS workshops. So let's keep that on the front burner.
Just to point that out, I think that's one that we found sort of with. I think Charlotte expressed interest in that one too.
Yeah.
And that's something that we talked about with. There's a conversation that Avery and I had about it elsewhere, but I don't remember all the details. But just saying, that's the one that we mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that. But that, it's coming up in like a month, so let's put something together for that. And then the workshop lists. I think we did this last week with the workshops, but this is worth going back and seeing if the websites are up. And if you're interested in a certain workshop, you look for the website on the web, and then find the deadlines for those. So the NeurIPS volunteer applications. If you're a student, oftentimes they'll have, and I think Jesse knows about this, where you have like the opportunity to volunteer in exchange for them paying your registration fees, I believe. I mean, it's an opportunity for students to become involved in a conference, sort of, in the background where a lot of the organization is going on. I did that once for a conference where, you get to see like sort of the inner workings of the conference. And this is a physical conference, so there were a lot of venue issues and organizing workshops and things. So.
It's also really good for like early career people, honestly, to just volunteer.
Yeah.
Because you can get major conferences on your CV, saying you're volunteering or your contributions to the community or service for your field of study. Like it's it's a really good thing to do, and I recommend it. I did it with ACML a little bit this year. I didn't really get to do that much with them because my life has been so busy, but I really encourage everybody to look into those things all the time. Like it's part of and that's kind of a side. I think because it came up now in my mind, but like I think having kind of a, for lack of better terms, professional development component regularly to the lab would be good. We kind of do this anyway, but it's like thinking about segments and installments for like each straight up science communication or and I'm actually considering, we haven't talked about this at all, so it's something to think about later, but maybe even like having a social media component. Like I haven't done much with Facebook recently for the lab, but maybe something on like Instagram as well. It's a little bit more. There's a very strong science communication crowd on Instagram, and I think that may be a good way to get some involvement or attention about some things we want to do, and particularly things like professional development or like tips and ideas. There's a good, for lack of better terms, market, maybe more like economy for that. So that's been in the back of my mind for a little bit, but I think it'd be nice to have a regular segment, not necessarily every week even, but like maybe once a month or twice a month or something, or as necessary, but just like some kind of a academic researcher tips the trade kind of a thing. We talk about this all the time informally in the labs.
Yeah.
But just making it a little more formal, and maybe having like some blog posts about it would be good. And this is kind of another thing too, where like I know I'm totally diverging from my topic, but like kind of why I was looking at potentially an assistant lab manager to kind of help with some of just the internal writing up of stuff, because there's a lot of there's so many. We have a whole lot of, and I really do think one of the most special things we do, like we are a research and education lab. Like we are, if not directly, at all the time, we were very interested in the educational component and developmental component of researchers and bringing people aboard and situating them and that kind of stuff. So I think that's something that I might want to look into making a little more. I don't know. I just see a lot of potential there, to maybe put a little more structure to and have some really nice things come from that. So major tangent, but wanted to say that before I forget.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And I think there's like a demand for that. It's just a matter of like putting together the materials. And I've been updating the that thing I showed off a couple weeks ago about the sort of the computational methods page. So I've added a couple more I've been adding resources to it. So it started out as a sort of neuromatch preparation thing, and it's become like has neuromatch stuff. It has stuff from the Santa Fe Institute, has stuff from like networks relevant stuff. So you go through this this list of resources, and there are a lot of resources out there that are.
Is there a specific link to that?
Let me see if I can find it. I'll put it in the chat. I'm gonna put this link in the chat. This is going to be to the main, and I'm going to open it up. I don't know if that's right. Oh, I think that's actually with some dashes after the. Just trying to remember the URL here for this.
Oh, the team, the group.
Yeah. So this is the. Yeah, this is the. All right. So this is the web page. It's this. Let me share my screen. So you can see what I'm talking about here. But it's on that web page, and this is the. So it's this this curriculum here, Brains, Behavior, and Complexity curriculum. So this is the meta curriculum. This is like annotated resources. This is NMA, computational neuroscience, and deep learning. So we have the deep learning track and the computational neuroscience track. If you're coming into the lab, you say, "Oh, this is something that we're involved in." You have these resources that are there all the time for people to look at. Then, like Artificial Life has some resources. I have the ISIL Summer School, which I talked about a couple weeks ago, but there's probably more to put in this. Then there's complexity theory, so there's the Complexity Explorer, which is sponsored by the Santa Fe Institute. They have a lot of good tutorials on some of the topics that we've talked about: information theory, agent-based modeling, game theory. There's also some lectures from the Santa Fe Institute. The NetSci Ed, which is a group that focuses on network science education. They have some materials on network literacy. And there's some data science things I put on there. So these are things that and then this kind of tells you about like the type of things that we're, interested in the group to sort of facilitate good practices or learning. And then there's some general resources. So this is stuff that as we're adding to this. This is one way to sort of curate a lot of this professional development type stuff. And then I think another component of that, of course, would be having a series of tips and tricks or ways to facilitate questions that people might not come out and ask. on a regular basis. Like, how do I get involved in some group activity? Or, and maybe even it's as simple as like, how do I get involved in the lab in a project? Because I know it seems like kind of silly to us, but like maybe someone is not quite sure how to ask, to be involved in something because they're intimidated or because they just don't know, you know. Um,
Yeah, and there's a few like there's we could were you saying they don't know how to get involved with stuff in the sense of having the resources there would help with that, or
well, I mean, just in terms of like, how do you get involved in something? Um, and I don't know, when I would go to conferences when I was younger, it's often that conversation to start a conversation with someone, or to maybe like how there's some context in which it's easier to sort of get involved with something. Like
mm,
if you feel intimidated, or if I open up a paper, and I have a habit of doing this where I say, would you like to participate in this? And people don't know where to begin because they don't feel like they know enough about it. Um, and I'm just throwing this out there because I'm thinking
yeah,
about ways at which maybe are more subtle that people could benefit from. Um, yeah, how do people get involved? And it's not just a matter of just raising your hand. It's a matter of getting to raising your hand. And
right, and yes, and I think that like this also fits like this totally reminded me of what I was talking about regarding the the like professional skill development stuff too. Like even like there's a whole category about this, like actually doing this both a as a like a presenter or as an author looking to find co-authors, and as someone who is looking to someone leading a project and someone looking to join a project, and there's a whole set of dynamics about that I think are interesting to talk about. Also, as another, my mind is very disjointed today. I have complete tangent again to this, and it's as a note specifically to Bradley. After the meeting, I would maybe not like directly after, but like off off offline. Um, uh, a discussion to be had about using Notion again, and for
okay,
some specific uses of it, because um, I'm using it in some other areas, and I want to run something by you, but
okay,
it would take too long here,
yeah,
and I don't want to get everybody involved in it. But just um, Notion's a great way to organize some things, and so on and so forth. And thinking about thinking about like this is a really nice resource on the website that the brains, behaviors, and complexity curriculum, and I think like that's I think I think um sorry I think as a adjacent set of remarks, perhaps a really nice thing about the lab and our focus on education and even kind of outreach, because it's hard to really uh, I know Bradley knows exactly what I'm talking about, and I don't know the words to say it, and I imagine Avery does too here. But like, there's sort of one thing that's kind of come up lately is uh, there's sort of an inherent when you're innovating stuff, especially in an interdisciplinary area, and this kind of even ties all the way back to epistemological directories and a lot of our trajectory mapping stuff we just talked about. But there's to do that, seriously, there's sort of you have to kind of create a curriculum. You have to educate people in the process of saying, hey, here's an area we'd like to explore that's brand new. We're blazing a trail. We're doing interdisciplinary work. What do you need to know? How do we, if frontier map is a concept of somebody who's understanding like, hey, how do I even try to start mapping this field? And how do I find these critical points for, discussion and forks in the road? As someone who is kind of starting out on their own, there's sort of you can be a researcher that just says, hey, look at my paper and it'll tell you the path to follow. Yes, but there's also like a very valid educational component about curriculum development, like the resource you just put together. And how do you? It feels a bit like proselytizing or like spreading the gospel a little bit, but there's also like just a very valid component. How do you do that? The most legitimate, pragmatic sense. How do you communicate a curriculum study and situate the background and do like that's a tremendous that's I don't even know if that's really I don't actually know anybody really doing that in the way that I'm thinking about it in my mind in a particular way, because I know there's teachers who create curriculums and educational plans, yes, but doing that for a research plan it's quite a different thing, because a lot of times research is funding based or project based, but there's kind of a sweet spot between a research plan and a educational plan to get people up to speed, do that research. And I'm kind of freestyling about it right now, but yeah. I think what we've done, especially in my time, since my time here, like we've done a lot of things to this end, and I feel like there's, yes, a great professional development component we could talk about that in a workshop kind of sense, but also like actually fleshing out some of these education skills for, as it's called here, brains, behaviors, and complexity curriculum. Like that's having curriculums for things I think would be really helpful, and just like helpful in any levels, because like what we just talked about, where it's like, how do you bring someone up to speed if they want to contribute, if they don't know, you guys say, hey, I'm doing a Metagrain model, what's that? Or what is developmental AI? And that's a whole thing. We haven't really been focused on that a tremendous amount, but like there was a focus in the lab kind of earlier this year. I'm not saying it went away, but it's my focus to relationship from it. But it's like, okay, we're gonna try to develop a bit of the field of developmental AI, and putting some curriculums for that, putting out some guideposts. I think that's a great thing to do, and potentially a valid thing to do for the lab in some ways. And we are doing that, but just kind of returning to the formalization of that as a process, and thinking about ways to both do that and bring people aboard and say, hey, you want to join this project? Here's, target, like creating this sort of logistical development infrastructure for what we're doing and communicating that. Like, and again, I kind of feel like that's like I feel a little bit like I'm talking to myself about a lab manager should really be, as part of lab administration in a specific sense, but also like in a broader sense. I think there's, this isn't the same thing as doing research and computational modeling directly, but there's sort of a meta level that's thinking about this. So those are all just some thoughts in my mind about it.
Yeah, I think that's great. There's a lot to talk about with this, and I will meet with you offline about this. Maybe not today, but about the Notion thing. Actually, if we could talk about this sort of, you could just talk about it in the Slack, and then we can maybe meet next week. I think Friday we have that meeting time where we can do like lab manager type things that might, just kind of give me an idea, heads up about what you're thinking in terms of Notion.
I'm gonna put some notes before I forget them in one of the lab, like in the lab admin channel stuff. So
yeah, okay, yeah. Avery, do you have anything to add to that, or?
Not in particular right now.
Okay. All right. So I actually did want to go over something really quick before we move on to papers, and that is this. I did review some of the notes from this meeting that we had back on March 27th, and that probably isn't that long ago, but it's I couldn't remember it, so I had to go back and check out the date. It was this year. It was March of 2021. So it was Rashab, Jesse, and Danielle meeting in this with myself, and we had a meeting off, on a day other than Saturday. I can't remember what day it was, and we were just kind of going through some of the things that maybe we'd go and focus on at that point. So at that point, we were doing. I don't know if the embodied AI meeting had happened yet. I know we had gone through the NeuroSim submissions. I think we had made some submissions to A-Life. So that's where we were in terms of our headspace. So, we're talking about new research areas. And so we're talking about embodied intelligence as maybe one of our strengths. And then this was Rashab who brought this up, have more of a focus on reinforcement learning and bio-inspired learning. So I think we've kind of covered that in our more recent endeavors, especially in developing the developmental AI sort of pantheon of approaches. Definitely reinforcement learning is something we could focus on more. I know that Rashab is interested in it and Krishna is interested in it, and this is a theme that kind of goes, it's a dialogue between bio-inspired approaches and sort of like a traditional AI approach with some adaptive systems thrown in. So definitely we could focus more on that. But that's something that we don't really have a formal infrastructure for. We don't have a formal program for it, but I think there's an opportunity to sort of sprinkle in reinforcement learning where appropriate. There was a Stanford HCI conference, which was the intersection of machine learning and AI and psych. This is a set of the HCI conference. I think it had happened recently back then. So those themes are interesting. There's also a theme, I think, on augmented intelligence, which is a theme that we sort of I bring up from time to time, but isn't one of our main projects. So that's something we could focus on more in the future as well. There's this neural correlates of biological activities. This is, again, I think in our case, this is more about bio-inspiration, although we talk about some of these in our meetings. Certainly in the trajectories talk, we talked about some of these sorts of psychological approaches, and that's worth following up on. I'd like to also, I know Avery presented in the trajectory session. I'd like to follow up on some of those references that they brought up. It was a really interesting talk. There was a lot of stuff there that I think is a lot of potential in some of these directions as well. And then, so for the near future, so this allostasis machines paper, like I said, Rashab wanted to add a reinforcement learning component, but we're kind of on hold with that. I haven't heard from Rashab on that in a while. So this is like taking the allostasis machines paper, which had a nice base model in it, but then there's also some more statistical implementation and better results to be had to show kind of the connection to the simulating intelligence part. But this is stuff that we can pick up. We can start with a paper, present it somewhere, put it out as a preprint, and then build upon it as we need. And I think that's another advantage of doing how we do things here, is that we have people who we come up with an idea in a meeting, we flesh it out as a paper, and then we improve upon it. And that's the way most research is done. We also have some things to follow up with on Bratenberg vehicles. So Stefan did his presentation, Stefan Dvoretsky, at at the Embodied AI conference, there's a lot to follow up on that in terms of spatial cognition, in terms of agents and spatial cognition, and all of that. And they, in the DevaWorm meeting, which is the other group that I do on Mondays, we have we talked about developmental agents and developmental Bradenberg vehicles more in the sense of like differentiating the tissues that make up a developmental agent. So, how does the brain and the body not only work together in an embodied context, but how do they sort of undergo morphogenesis to go from like maybe like a spherical agent, like I said, the spherical models, to something that has a lot of functionality, both in a nervous system and then a body. So these are issues that we can follow up on. I think we brought up OpenAI and the toolboxes and environments. So I think Krishna talked about that earlier in the meeting. There are a lot of opportunities to use existing tools to sort of, use as benchmarks or to run your simulations. And so, if people are interested in moving to implementation, we don't talk about that as much as we did maybe 2 years ago, because we talk about a lot of things. But it's just worth keeping in mind that we can do these we have these tools that we can use, and they're getting better all the time. So we have these traditional Atari benchmarks or video game benchmarks where we know sort of the complexity of the environment, and then we can introduce agents and test them against benchmark tasks. So that's all there. We have these Moray Life workshops that kind of like we're thinking about planning, how to move forward, sandbox models, animal AI test beds. So there's some, I think this was something that Rashad brought up. This is again benchmarking our models, drawing from the EI workshop. So I know Jesse learned a lot from the EI workshop, and I've learned, and Stefan was presenting there as well. But I think there's a lot there that we can draw from if we go back over our notes on that to see if we can find something that really will drive the work forward. There's this nascent area of grounded learning. This was a baby AI paper from 2018. This is, I think, something Rashad mentioned. I'm not really sure what. I don't think I remember. It might be in the Slack somewhere. I don't know. Maybe we could find that paper and look at it. I think it was like who was that was on it. Anyways, I don't remember, but that's okay because we will find it and look it over. There are things like grounded vision, which is the symbolic relationship between agent and environment, and then there's a way humans learn that's not iterative, it's not backprop, but it's something else. So and then there's ecological psychology, neurosymbolic AI. There's this EVO-NN framework. And then talking about the NeurIPS workshops for this coming year. So these are all things that, we'll keep an eye on. So those were our notes from the planning meeting. I'd like to have another planning meeting perhaps in the near future. And I don't know what people are thinking about, but we've, since March we've done a lot of things that have been like, of course we've done the trajectories work, we've done some stuff with AI ethics, and then we've done some stuff with driving the developmental AI stuff forward, and then other things as well that we don't talk about as much. But I think those are the three areas maybe we could plan to sort of advance, and it's really a matter of just finding what people are interested in, and then finding ways to do that. So, maybe we get a little bit more someone picks up the mantle, not just of a project, but of like getting a test bed that we can use. So, being able to test hypotheses in a test bed, building agents. And we used to do that through Google Summer of Code. So we'd have people who had like some incentive to do it. But, there's also just, as part of a research project, if you set up a test bed, you get authorship. We can do some really cool things. So those are all possibilities. And I'm not sure what people, have time to do or want to do, but these are things that we need to figure out to get to that next step. So that's that, and then so let's go to the papers now. Do we have any questions or comments about that? I don't think there are.
My only comment is absolutely, and I agree.
Okay, well, yeah. So yeah, we'll talk about that more in the next coming weeks. So then, finally, I wanted to get to papers and some of the things that I've been collecting here. So I've made these collections. Okay, this is it. That was one of them, the notes in the research meeting. So there's this other thing, and we talked about this, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago. We talked about this rise and fall of VR article, and that was in The Verge, I think. And that was a very nice introduction to some of the history and some of the sort of the summers and winters of VR, although people don't think of it like that necessarily. But I've been on this quest to find the summers and winters of VR graph like they have for AI, and I haven't been able to find it. There are articles like that where there's a lot of fluctuation, and you have these advances, and then you have these fallbacks where they say, oh, this is cool, this is a cool thing that happened, and then it kind of goes away for a while because people can't realize it. You have a lot of visionaries in VR that you don't necessarily have in AI, and what I mean by that is you have people like Jaron Lanier, or you have people like different people who are doing really cool things, and then there's this, they might get some funding to do a startup, and then that kind of falls back after a while. So you have it's there. It is personality driven to an extent, more so than AI, but I'm not sure you can define it quite in the same way. But there's this article from the Frontiers in Psychology. This was from 2018, and these are some authors, people who do a lot of stuff in VR. Giuseppe Riva, who does a lot of stuff in VR, very prolific author in that area. This is an Italian lab where they did this paper, The Past, Present, and Future of Virtual and Augmented Reality Research, a network and cluster analysis of the literature. So this isn't quite the summers and winters graph, but this is getting towards some sort of analysis of the research landscape, which is a little bit different than, say, the visionaries and the people driving the technologies. It's more like people using the technology to do research, which is interesting because it's a little bit different. With AI, it's kind of condensed into the summers and winters idea is more about funding and about the general presence of it in departments. In VR, you have people doing the technology development, things coming out like head-mounted displays and people doing cool things, and then you have the research, which is more about how people interact with the technology and things like that. And so we've talked about some of those behaviors and interactions in the past, but this is kind of in the technology definitely drives the experimentation. So if you have a low-cost system that emerges, people will use it to do experiments, but that's these things are also decoupled. So the recent appearance of low-cost virtual reality technologies like the Oculus Rift, the HTC Vive, and the Sony PlayStation VR, and mixed reality interfaces like the HoloLens, and notice these names change over time. So the HoloLens is the current thing. There was Google Glass about 10 years ago, and they're different iterations of the same basic technology, and they enable different types of research. But so these types of technologies are attracting the attentions of users and researchers. It may be the next largest stepping stone in technological innovation. However, the history of VR technology is longer than it may seem. So the concept of VR was formulated in the 1960s. So this was back at about the time of, when they were developing the first user interfaces. And so they had the first user interfaces coming about, and they had VR was kind of imbued in that. And then, because when you use a desktop, for example, Douglas Engelbart did a lot of research on the desktop and on icons and manipulating icons, visual interfaces for computers and that, and using mice to control them, computer mice. And so VR kind of grew out of that. And it's a natural concept if you have this virtual world that you're interacting with your motor system and your visual system. If you could just take that and make it, make it richer, and you could represent other things in the world other than this rudimentary interface. So that's where it kind of came out of. And then there's this first commercial VR system that appeared in the late 80s. So back in the late 80s, there was this drive of building these, what were essentially at the time large and clunky VR environments with huge headsets and very rudimentary graphics, but they were cool, the coolest thing to date, because there was nothing like it. So for this reason, during the past 20 years, hundreds of researchers have explored the processes, effects, and applications of this technology, producing thousands of scientific papers. What is the outcome of this work? And so they went to the Web of Science. They collected all existing articles on VR in this Quark Collection database, and they got over 21,000 records for VR and about 10,000 for augmented reality. They collected the bibliometric information. So the network and cluster analysis showed a composite panorama characterized by changes in evolution over time. Until about 5 years ago, which would have been about 2013, the main publication medium of VR was basically the conference proceeding and maybe journals. More recently, journals constitute the main medium. So there's been a shift to publishing in journals. So it's like, basically there was a lot of computer science work where they use conference proceedings as the main unit of publication, and then it moved to maybe things like, general scientific journals or psychology journals. And so this is what they're doing here. They're looking at the literature, and I don't know if there are any. I'm looking for some figures here, because that's really what we're trying to do here. Okay, here we go. So this is figure 1. This is a category from the Web of Science network. So this is where a lot of the publications are. You can see they're just in every, I wouldn't say every conceivable discipline, but there's a lot of disciplines that represent VR publications. So you have this large presence in education and computer science, in engineering, in imaging science, in clinical neurology. So you figure like people are using this to look at like how the brain works. They're simulating different things in a VR environment. They're doing computer science research. They're doing even robotics, or using VR for education. And then you have these areas that are outside of the core of this network. We have like, cardiac and cardiovascular systems, acoustics, geosciences, people building simulations, people looking at the, maybe there's like biomedical simulation up here, or, other types of things. So they're definitely different areas of research. And this tells you how they're connected. This tells you where people are publishing, which I don't think really varies too much from like where people the publishing patterns of people, with the rich countries being overrepresented here, but still. And then the different universities where this research is going on. Perhaps that's more interesting. University of Washington, University of Illinois, University of London, Imperial College, Southern California. So these are groups that exist in different places. Iowa State, which has a VR center. Like if you have a VR center, then you have a cluster of people working on this. So this is, again, where this activity is going on. And so then the journals that they're published in. So you actually see that there seem to be 3 clusters of publication activity. You have like, you have human-computer interaction, and even kind of 4, because you have this sort of cluster of neuroscience journals, neurophysiology, then psychology, human-computer interaction, then some things on like presence and like communication, and some biomedical journals in here. Then there's cyber psychology and behavior, which kind of ties those together. We have a couple outliers here with like engineering journals, and then some human factors in medical journals where they're doing medical simulation. So it's interesting how that sort of the publication venues are bifurcated like this into different clusters. But and of course these clusters have different lifespans. So sometimes they get really active, sometimes maybe less active. So we don't really know those patterns here. And then finally, authors in this graph. So there's some pretty prolific authors. They still don't have that timeline though. But they have a lot of, I like the network graphs that they have in here. A lot of the this is a co-citation graph. So this is who's citing who. So a lot of interesting data in this paper. Yeah, so we should look this paper over a little bit more. I don't know how much useful information there is in terms of the specific thing we want to know about here. But this is really some interesting stuff, though. It's just like if you want to look at like how VR has permeated. Actually, this is a nice timeline. In fact, this is actually where you have time up here, 1985 to 2016, and then you have these different fields where you have different things, different amounts of co-citation going on. So you have periods where there's a lot of co-citation, a lot of publications in a certain field, and somewhere it falls back. So it looks like, for example, virtual city environment. I guess this is a keyword, which doesn't represent a specific field, but you see that there's this huge amount of activity at about 2010, and then it kind of falls off. And again, this is like where there's this co-citation behavior, and the articles are, I believe this is the number of these concentric circles represent sort of the rank of the articles. So it's kind of like the prolific amount of stuff happening at that time in that area. And these aren't fields necessarily, but they're keywords. So that might be somewhere to start with this timeline. So I guess that's enough on that. I just wanted to go over that. I think there's some interesting things going on with VR. Definitely, if you're looking for trends in VR, that's one citation you should really look at more deeply. Let's see. Then there's this collection of papers that I found, and I don't know how interesting this is. This is just kind of a grab bag of things. But this kind of goes into some issues on what they call ethnoscience, which is the idea that there's science that's objective, and then there's ethnoscience or indigenous science, or I don't know. I have a little bit of a problem with the way this is framed because it's kind of a general view. They think of ethnoscience as like, how we're influenced by our preconceptions and the culture that we bring to science. But that's not really what ethnoscience is. It's really more about different types of epistemological systems that you would use to investigate science. But in any case, they talk a lot about, in this blog post, that just talks a lot about the idea that, science is influenced by, where you're coming from. They talk about, Islamic science of about 1,000 years ago and how they saw the world and how they engaged with the natural world. And it's kind of an interesting read. And, things about how people used in medieval times in Europe, how they did different types of solar observations, how Polynesians would navigate using the stars. And so how do those views differ from modern science? And certainly in those contexts, people had different sort of epistemological systems that they were using to interpret the natural world. So that's this blog post. Then there's this other paper here that's a lot more rigorous in terms of viewing ethnoscientific expertise. And so this is ethnoscientific expertise and knowledge specializations in 55 traditional cultures. So this is about... So the abstract reads, people everywhere acquire high levels of conceptual knowledge about their social and natural worlds, which we refer to as ethnoscientific expertise. So this is where you in different cultures, and they don't make that clear. That you have this. So it isn't that you're in a different country doing, well, engaged in the scientific pursuit. Like if you go to Neuromatch and you're from another country, one country versus another, you're engaging with the same material. Now, how you interpret that material might differ a bit, how you view it. But they're in this case, it's almost kind of like you're raised with a totally different worldview. And so this is how and then you engage with the natural world. So, I mean, there's a difference there between, just kind of like points of view and like this whole cloth, different way of thinking about the world. But anyways, we analyzed ethnographic text records, 547, describing ethnoscientific expertise among 55 cultures in the human relations area files, which is a bibliometric thing for the social sciences, for anthropology specifically, but to investigate the mutually compatible rules of collaboration, proprietary knowledge, cultural transmission, honest signaling, and mate provisioning. We found relatively high levels of evidence for collaboration, proprietary knowledge, and cultural transmission, and lower levels of evidence for honest signaling and mate provisioning. So this is these are mutually compatible rules of collaboration. So I guess they're looking at like universals in this case. In exploratory analyses, we found that whether expertise involved proprietary versus transmitted knowledge depended on the domain of expertise. Specifically, medicinal knowledge was positively associated with secretive and specialized knowledge for resolving uncommon and serious problems, like proprietary knowledge. Motor skill-related expertise, such as subsistence and technological skills, was positively associated with broadly competent and generous teachers, which is cultural transmission. We also found that the collaborative expertise was central to both of these models and was generally important across different knowledge areas and skill domains. So they're looking at these cross-cultural studies. They're trying to find, they have a social media summary here. So in this cross-cultural study, we found that experts with observable motor skills like tool making were often teachers, but specialists with conceptual know-how for uncommon problems like illness use secretive knowledge to help clients. So that's interesting how, like, in some cultures, there's this difference between secretive knowledge and, like, teaching, generalized teaching. So, like, tool making versus, like, medicinal worlds. And so, actually, you can kind of see that in modern science, or I guess in modern science, there are certain aspects of how we think about, like, different skills. So, we have, like, methods which, sometimes they're secretive. But I found that when I was in grad school, there seemed to be this sort of secretive nature to some of the methods, to some of the things that were out there in the world. And it's like you'd have to learn it through sort of an informal approach, like, I guess mathematics is a good example where you have to know sort of all about how notation works and everything before you can kind of get the most out of your education. So I think, modern science, as much as we like to think of it as like this, thing where you just come to it and you learn, and there is a lot of this sort of secretiveness, and it kind of comes maybe from the medieval era where, there was a secretive aspect to deep truths. And, the way the educational system is set up, where you earn a PhD in its philosophy, and there's this, this professor that gives you the knowledge. It's kind of interesting to see that, other cultures, they use this division between, like, kind of, what's openly taught and what's maybe more secretive, and, part of this sort of guild that you have to have, like, inside knowledge, really understand it fully. So that's just I think a point here worth thinking about. So this is, they do this study across cultures, and they find this sort of pattern. So that's another interesting thing to follow up on. What is this one? This is actually something from the Cultural Evolution Society conference. This is the Emergence of Cultural Attractors. So this is a paper on sort of applying complexity theory to culture and looking at, like, some of these things. They're looking at, like, attractor states. So the states, they're looking at these agents, and they're looking at how they sort of converge upon different cultural systems. So they're using a lot of complexity theory. They're using some measures like information theory, and they're looking at conformity. So they're looking at conformity across agents, how they converge upon different cultural values. This is something that I didn't see the presentation for this, but it should be available online. I don't think that I was the only one to get into the underlying system for that. So, and then finally, there's this paper, What are Cultural Attractors? So this paper was on like a specific aspect of cultural attractors, the emergence of cultural attractors. This article describes what cultural attractors are. So this is a paper in the biological philosophy. The abstract reads is that so this is based on something called cultural attractor theory. Concepts from cultural attractor theory are now used in domains far from their original home in anthropology and cultural evolution. Yet these concepts have not been consistently characterized. I here distinguish 4 ways in which the cultural attractor concept has been used and identified using 3 kinds of factors of attraction typically appealed to. Clarifying these explanatory concepts identifies problems and ambiguities in the work of cultural epidemiologists and commentators alike. So this talks about cultural attractor theory. It's a subset of cultural evolution. Has the aim of explaining how ideational variants, which are just ideas that different types of ideas held by agents, change in their distribution and form over time. Within cultural evolutionary theory, CAT, which is the cultural attractor theory, is distinguished by its transformative approach, holding that the contents of variants are transformed during the acquisition process. So the idea is one of cultural attractors. Cultural attractors are theoretical posits that capture the way in which certain ideational variants are more likely to be the outcome of transformations in others. So, insofar as these transformations are systematic across members of a population, CAT can be used to explain changes in the distribution and form of ideational variants in a population over time. So this is where you have a bunch of things that are being transmitted across individual agents. They transform them as they learn them. So when you learn something, you transform this thing, and then we look at like the distribution of them. But what they're arguing here is that those things can end up becoming, you get like they don't end up just going all over the place. They end up forming individual groups or discrete groups. So this is kind of an interesting theory. When I was first reading this, I thought, well, maybe they're using attractor basins and very typical dynamical system stuff. But they're not really using that, at least as far as I can see. They're using this idea that there's a sort of attraction of... They're using kind of the metaphor of attractor basins, but they're not actually doing the analysis of attractor analysis, which would be to look at a trajectory to see if it like sort of orbits common points. And but there's this idea that, you have these things that are transmitted to different people. They're transformed as they take them in, but then they cluster together at some point in the future. So there's this, that maybe suggests that there's a lot of sort of common processing going on that, cultural diversity isn't as sort of willy-nilly as we might like to think, that there's this sort of, you get these clusters nonetheless. So in this case, like in a specific model, they found that there are 31 possible smoking behaviors. So there are different ways in which people smoke. Everyone, gets a cigarette, they smoke it in a different way maybe, but there are actually 31 possible smoking behaviors. So it's not that people are just trying every possible combination. They're actually smoking in maybe a lot of different modes, but it's restricted. So they build this model where they take these different modes of behavior. They look at like how over time maybe some of these behaviors become dominant in the population. They pick from the older generation to learn these behaviors, and then some of them are more popular than others. So you end up with maybe some dominant modes of behavior or some dominant forms of of the dominant variants that come into being. So this is actually draws a lot more from population genetics and things like selective sweeps and things like that than it does from complexity theory. So this is interesting how they kind of talk about the attraction curve and sampling bias. So that's all right. So that was just a kind of a grab bag on culture and expertise. I'm not going to get into any more papers here. I'm not sure what this paper is. Okay, that's not something I want to talk about today. So I think that's good. I was going to talk about this paper, Cultural Evolution of Genetic Heritability, but I think I'm going to wait on that for next week. It's kind of an interesting paper. They talk about this dual inheritance framework. So they talk about cultural evolution and behavior genetics. So usually in a lot of traditional cultural evolution, like the Feldman and Sforza approach, they talk about cultural, like memes or cultural evolution of ideas, and population genetics being this dual inheritance framework. So you inherit genes, population genetics, you can characterize someone's genetic composition, and then cultural evolution can characterize by distribution of their beliefs, and those things maybe they co-evolve, maybe they are divergent. In this case, they're actually looking at behavioral genetics, and this is a little bit different framework to think about. This takes like the idea that there's this behavioral genetics, so like if behavior has a genetic basis and then it also has a cultural basis, and then those things may be the heritability might differ between societies or over the lifetime or whatever. And so there's this, they're just trying to build this sort of dual inheritance framework, and it's a little bit different than the typical dual inheritance framework. But they hope it resolves controversies such as the nature-nurture debate and controversies such as IQ. Well, good luck with that. But I don't think that, this really kind of deals with a lot of issues related to weird populations, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. So, we often think of psychology in terms of those populations because those have been sampled quite a bit. But I think in our group, we're trying to get a broader perspective. We're trying to get maybe one that involves cultural diversity and seeing how behavior varies across cultures. And so, this is the cultural evolutionary approach, can explain a lot of things you see across cultures and maybe some things that you'll see in terms of cultural variation. So some of that is because people have a genetic basis for their behavior and it becomes manifest in going in one direction versus another. Not that they're necessarily genetically differentiated, but that there's, that there's this, that there are these behavioral genetic underpinnings. Like I said, I don't think they're going to resolve. I think there's going to be a lot of more so this is going to be a behavioral and brain sciences paper. So this is going to be a target article. And as we talked about in the trajectories group, these target articles will have a lot of responses to them. This is one of the authors. And so I imagine a lot of these responses are going to be quite contentious. So I don't think they're going to solve a lot of problems. They might make more problems than they solve with this approach, but I was looking through the paper and I noticed that it was a little bit odd. I didn't really understand some of the figures that were in it. I think they're kind of like trying to replace like the population genetics approach with the behavioral genetics, and I'm not really sure that they get there all the way. They do have this figure here about predicting heritability. So for different, so this is what I meant about like the dual inheritance. So, in different cultures, you might like emphasize some behaviors over others. Like for example, different types of cultural beliefs might lean on some behaviors over others, and so you might have, some differences in culture due to behavioral genetics. But I mean, this is of course just as controversial as any of these other issues they're trying to solve. So this is a little graphic that they put in. I mean, this looks a little bit memey for behavioral and brain sciences, but in any case, this is where you have this variability in the trait, variability in environment and culture, variability in genes, and then that's supposed to predict heritability, which, depending on the trait, is variable. So it's an interesting paper. I don't know. Again, this doesn't have the responses in it. So I'm just curious what the responses are going to... Oh, maybe it does. Okay, well, maybe not. In any case, we can go over the responses if people are interested, because I imagine those are going to be pretty interesting. It just has a lot of methods in that. So, yeah, this is a really long paper to begin with. So anyways, that's all I had. And I think Jesse had to leave. Okay, well, thanks for attending, Jesse. And so Avery's here. All right, Avery. Well, thanks for sticking around. Did you have any comments or questions on the last part? Okay. Well, thanks for attending, and Jesse and Krishna as well. And we'll be on Slack for the rest of the week. Or if you have something over the week you want to talk about, we'll keep the conversation going. Have a good week. Bye.